प्रतिबोधितां भगवता नारायणेन स्वयं व्यासेन ग्रथितां पुराणमुनिना मध्ये महाभारतम्।
ॐ असतो मा सत्कमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय आविराविर्मयेति रुद्रयत्ते दक्षिणं मुखं तेन मां पाहि नित्यम्. May the divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So we resume our study of the Gita. We saw that the historical context of the Gita, how it begins on the battlefield, how after having come to the battlefield, Arjuna suddenly decides that he doesn't want to fight. And in the first chapter, we see how he gives a lot of reasons about why war is bad, why violence is bad, why it's a bad idea to be killing people, and especially killing one's own, and therefore he's not going to do it. We don't know what he was thinking, but if he expected that Krishna would be very happy to see this sudden spirit of renunciation that had come over him, he was in for a very rude shock, because far from appreciating what Arjuna was saying, Krishna in fact says in an extremely strong language, asks Arjuna, what has come over you? This kind of faint-heartedness. And it's a pretty strong language that is used if you look at the verses 2 and 3 of the second chapter. And that unexpected reaction from Krishna probably stirs something within Arjuna. And maybe he takes a second look at what was happening within him, which is when he acknowledges that he is in fact confused. I do not know what I should do. I am confused about my duty in these present circumstances. And then he requests Arjuna to guide him, to accept him as a student, and please guide me. That's what Arjuna tells Krishna. And that's when Krishna's teachings begin, from the 11th verse of the second chapter. And we saw right away that Krishna launches into the description of the nature of the spirit, the nature of the Atman. Who am I really? Who is this I? And then, after having described the nature of this I, he then speaks about karma, that how Arjuna should fight without seeking the fruits of his work, without seeking the results of his activity, how that's what he should be doing. And then Arjuna asks him, if all this is supposed to lead to enlightenment, what are the characteristics of that enlightenment? And then in the concluding section, we saw Krishna describing the characteristics of the enlightened being. So this is where we are. Now, this sometimes reminds me of almost like a mystery novel in some sort of way. Sometimes when you read a mystery story or a novel, in the beginning, many of the ingredients or the plot looks pretty unconnected. and it's not easy to figure out. And which is why if a good mystery means you wouldn't know until the end the answers to many of the questions that get raised. And once you know the answer, and then when you go and when you reread that novel or whatever mystery storyline, whether it's a play or a movie, whatever it is that you are seeing, after having known the answer, when you go back to the beginning, then you are able to see that the clues were present there all along. But we didn't notice it then. But once you know the answer, and then you are able to kind of connect the dots, so to speak. It's also like I was a big fan of Sherlock Holmes books when I was young. And it's almost like there has been some theft or a crime somewhere. And Sherlock Holmes goes there with his friend, Dr. Watson. And just a look, a brief inspection of the area, and whatever clues might be present there, Holmes quickly gets the idea, understands exactly what had happened. For him, the problem is solved. And then we see in many of the Sherlock Holmes stories, his friend Watson then asks, Sherlock, how do you know this happened? And then Sherlock then explains to him, oh, it's a good lesson in deductive logic of because of this is the thing. So explains and kind of connects the dots. This is a little bit like that. The things seem unconnected. Arjuna doesn't want to fight for apparently a good reason. And then Krishna starts speaking about the Atman. Then he says, work without expecting the results. How are these disparate ideas connected? One connection we have already seen in our earlier reflections, and that is why identity is so important. That whatever we do in life, the way we react, the way we make our choices, the way we take our decisions, are directly related to our identity at that time. And so that is why it's a little bit easier to understand why Krishna launches into the description of the Atman, which, according to the Gita, is our true identity. But then he speaks about work without without expecting any results. That connection may not be so clear. And that's really one of the first questions that Arjuna asks him. And that's how the next chapter, the third chapter, begins. The dilemma is this. Arjuna is intelligent enough to understand that clearly my present identity as Arjuna, as a prince, as a human being, is not the final answer. It needs refinement. That my real identity is that I am birthless and deathless. So essentially, I don't know my identity, my true identity, and I should know who I truly am. So it's clearly a matter of knowing. But then he sees Krishna telling him, now go and fight. Do your duty. And how should you do your duty? Do your duty without seeking any results. That doesn't seem to make sense. It didn't make sense to Arjuna, and it may not make sense to many of us. Philosophically, the question is, what is exactly the problem? There are certain problems that can be solved through action. And there are certain problems that can be solved through knowledge. What is exactly the problem here? By affirming one's identity as the Atman, Krishna seems to be suggesting that the problem is of knowledge. that I don't know who I am, and I should know. So knowledge is what I need. So why should I work? One example that is sometimes given in Vedantic teaching is this, that suppose think about it this way. Suppose there is a snake in my room, a poisonous snake, a ferocious snake, and I want to protect myself. In that case, what is called for is not knowledge. I already have knowledge. Here is the snake. Now, the problem of protecting myself from that poisonous snake, it calls for action. I need to get a stick, or I need to get a gun, or whatever is available at my disposal, and go and shoot it, or kill it, or beat it, do something to kill that snake. So action, work is what is necessary. But what if that snake is not real? What if the classical example given in Vedanta is about the rope snake analogy? What if it is actually a rope, and because of insufficient light, I'm mistaking it for a snake? Now that snake which I see, no amount of work will help. I might have guns, I might have sticks, I might have all kinds of weapons with me. None of those weapons can kill that snake. So work doesn't help. What we need is a knowledge. The knowledge that it is actually a rope will make the snake disappear. So that's the distinction. Where will knowledge help me, and where will work help me? Now, if, as it seems, the problem is my false identity, then that can only be solved through knowledge of my true identity. Why is then Krishna asking Arjuna to do work? That's essentially the question. If you look at, just it begins that way. The very first verse in 3rd chapter. Jayasi chet karmanaste mata buddhir janardana tat kim karmani ghore mam niyojayasi keshava. O Janardana, O Krishna, according to you, knowledge is superior to action. Why then do you engage me in this terrible action? Why are you asking me to fight the war? And then Krishna goes on to describe later that there are really two methods or two ways that are open before us. The path of knowledge and the path of action. And for yours is the path of action. Now, there is a lot that has been said about these two paths, or whether they are two independent paths or one is subsidiary to the other, and there are many different schools of thought which have interpreted the relationship between jnana and karma, knowledge and work, in different ways. One way that is often or seems most prevalent in Vedantic study is that what work does is that it purifies my heart. If the work that I do, if it is done in a completely selfless way, if my work is done as a yoga, as a form of spiritual practice, then instead of creating more stress and worry and anxiety, the work becomes a liberating force. The work purifies my heart. And when my heart is purified, I acquire what in Sanskrit they say, chitta shuddhi, the purity of the heart, or clarity of vision. Now with that clarity, I'm able to acquire fitness for the knowledge that I am the Atman. So, knowledge is what will liberate me. But in order to acquire fitness for that knowledge, in order to acquire the power to remove the ignorance, I first need clarity of vision. And that clarity comes through working selflessly. So that is why Krishna urges Arjuna that no, you work. He's not directly telling him, but that's a very clear implication that right now you haven't become fit for that highest knowledge yet. And that's kind of obvious, as we saw. If Arjuna had been Sherlock Holmes instead of Dr. Watson, then at the end of the second chapter, after Krishna described to him the characteristics of the enlightened being, Arjuna would have said, all my doubts are over, now I know what to do, thank you, let's start. But it took another 16 chapters. So, Arjuna does say that, but it's way in the end. Towards the end, Arjuna says, now I get it. All my doubts are gone. But it's going to take some time yet for Arjuna. So right now, Krishna directly doesn't tell him, but that's what he obviously implies, that right now you are not yet ready for that highest knowledge. And so you must begin by working selflessly. Now, how do we work selflessly? And Krishna offers several insights, not only in chapter 3, but we'll find subsequently in the remaining part of the Gita as well. So although the chapter 3 is titled Karma Yoga, we should not make the mistake of thinking that all the ideas of karma related to karma are here. Yes, predominantly it does deal with it, but you'll find these ideas spread all through the Gita. So one of the ways we can try to work in a way that the work, instead of creating greater bondage for me, will in fact liberate me, will free me, is to look upon work as what the Gita calls yajna. Yajna means, yajna is a word that often gets translated as sacrifice. And so what is the kind of very simple way we can understand a Vedic sacrifice? The picture that immediately comes before our mind is clearly all of the Vedic sacrifices occurred in fire. So it was a fire worship, and they had very elaborate rules about how that fire has to be constructed, what kind of how many bricks and how that fire is to be lighted, very intricate rules. But what it essentially involved is a fire and offerings being made into the fire. And offerings would be often of ghee, flowers, and such things. Food as well. So what was the principle behind it? And one way of looking at that is what the Vedas present is not simply a material world. The Vedic rishis saw the entire creation, the entire universe as just filled with consciousness. They saw the universe as alive. One of the things that modern science, material science, has done is, I think, taken life away, taken consciousness away from our experience of the world. If we reduce everything to just atoms and molecules and force and energy, something very important gets lost from our experience. So it's important to recognize this. Sometimes in Vedantic study, the idea of Maya gets emphasized a lot by some people. What does not get equal emphasis is the vision of the Vedic sages that yes, there is this Maya, but what is this Maya covering? Maya is covering this living, conscious reality. So everything that the Vedic rishis saw happening in this world, both at the individual level and at cosmic level, they saw it as filled through and through with consciousness. So even rain was not just water vapor being evaporated and then getting condensed and falling down. That's a very kind of that's one way science might describe rain. But what the Vedic rishis saw, that behind every cosmic activity there was a conscious principle. So they personify what we see as forces of nature. The Vedic rishis personified them. And that's how we find all these Vedic deities are just personifications of the powers of nature. So rain, storm, water, fire, they saw them as living. And there was some conscious entity presiding over these cosmic activities. And so Indra, for instance, was seen as a presiding deity of the rains, who governed all the rains. And so what did the people do? Well, if you want rain, and clearly to grow grains and farming, you need rain. So because they saw the entire universe as alive, they said, let us make an offering to Indra. And Indra then in return will give us rain. And so the Vedic sacrifice, they made this offering. They had these mantras chanted, and all of those mantras, for instance, when they offered some, said, Indraya Swaha, I offer this to Indra. Now what they believed was this oblation that they were making in the fire in front of them, in some subtle way, and fire was considered a carrier. You could say the Vedic FedEx, if you like. The fire would carry these offerings, the subtle form of this offering, to the appropriate address. And Indra would be pleased by that offering and then give rain. And they saw that this is how it worked. So that is essentially a sacrifice. It essentially a completion of a circle. That's how they saw every activity as cyclical. That we make an offering, the deities, these unseen forces, are pleased by it and they give in return. And we get rain, we are able to grow food, and again out of gratitude we make further offering, and then it comes. So that's how the circle gets completed. And then we see that's essentially how all these cosmic activities are very cyclical in nature. That's how seasons come and in a cyclical way, one after another. Day follows night and night follows day. All these things are seen in that kind of a cyclical form. And that is the spirit of yajna. Now, just as it happens in these matters of cosmic phenomena, this happens in our individual lives as well. So if there is a cosmic sacrifice, then there is also a personal sacrifice. And you can see that cyclical thing happening in many different ways. For instance, now, whatever we are now at this moment, every one of us, no matter how much people might like to claim that, oh, I did all of this on my own, I didn't take anyone's help, don't believe them. None of us can do anything on our own. Among the newborns, the human baby is said to be the most helpless creature. I mean, even birds and animals, sometimes they are able to, after birth, those babies and little ones are become independent much faster than a human baby. And when we are born, we are totally helpless, completely at the mercy of the elders around who care for us. So, what we have received from the world from the moment we were born was all the care, the sacrifice, the love that is given by our parents or those who raised us. Then when we went to school, the education that we received from our teachers, again the love, friendship that we have received from our friends. And at every stage in our life, we will see that others have helped to my growth, to my being who I am. It's easy to say, well, I'll just go to the shop and buy a dozen apples, or just go and order some food, or order something from Amazon. But the food that comes to me, someone has grown it. There are people who have gone and worked into the farms. Most of us don't even know who they are. We may never meet them in our life. But they have gone and worked in those farms, and the produce of that farm, someone has transported that to the shop. And then someone has brought that from the shop. Either I go and bring it myself or you order it. But a lot of people, every time you sit at your table and eat something, it hasn't just dropped there miraculously. Hundreds and perhaps thousands of people have worked behind that every plate in front of you. Then the food that we eat, that food would not have been possible if the earth hadn't provided the fertile soil for it, if the sun had not provided the sunlight for it, if the rain, so sun, rain, soil, all of these things were necessary for that food to come, and I eat that. So what I am today is a resultant of so much in so many different forms I have received from the world. And so what do? It's not necessary that because someone has worked in the farm for me to get this food on my table, that I should also go and work in a farm. Well, if I can, that's great. But whatever I have received from the world, I should find in some way, in some form, be able to return to the world. And that's what we do. The knowledge, the skill, the talent, the education that we get, the energy that we have, in some form, every one of us is contributing to the world. Depending on our skills, we contribute in different ways. So the community in which we grow up helps us in innumerable ways, and in return, we offer our services to the community. So there is another one yajna, a circle gets completed. We receive love from others, and we give love outside. So what Krishna is telling Arjuna is, look upon the work that you do as a yajna, as a sacrifice. If I look upon my work as a form of sacrifice, then a lot of the negative results of work, I can be free from them. A lot of times, it's at the workspace that we have problems such as there is the ego clashes, there is the desire to control, desire to exploit, a lot of opportunities to be selfish, to hoard. All of this happens at workplace. But if I learn to look upon it as a yajna, that I'm just a part of a larger circle, I receive things from the world and I return. And I'm just one small cog in this big cosmic wheel. If I can do that, then it will help to minimize the ego. I just become an instrument. So that's one way Krishna urges Arjuna, that this is one way you can look upon work as a big part of a big sacrifice. So there is this cosmic sacrifice going on, and there is this individual sacrifice occurring. He also points out that what if someone says, and there are people who do say that I just want to get things from the world, but I'm not going to give anything. And then Krishna says, such a person is a thief. Now, there's one way we can understand what theft is. So that is taking for ourselves what doesn't belong to us. That's theft. And normally we understand, like, I break into someone's house and steal something, or take away something. But this is also a theft, that I'm getting benefit from the world, from the community, but I refuse to contribute to it. That's also a theft. Can I succeed? Apparently, yes. That's what many selfish people do. That's what many self-centered people do. But in the longer run, no. It doesn't work. In the short term, those people who are selfish, who want to hoard, might seem like, well, they are really deriving the benefit and not contributing. But we see that there are a lot of negativities connected with that kind of a mentality. But more so, there are much larger forces at work, which if I don't give willingly, I'll be forced to give. At the very least, everything that I have hoarded, everything that I have kept for myself, when I die, I cannot take any of those things with me. So, the last big slap nature can give us is, if you don't want to contribute, you will have to. You cannot not contribute. And so that's one way of looking upon the work as yajna. Krishna also points out to Arjuna that even if you see that acquiring the knowledge of the self is somehow a higher, a better activity, a better thing to do, and one might think, if work creates stress or anxiety in me, better not to work. And then Krishna points out, if you look at verses 4 and 5, Krishna says you cannot not work. You don't have that option. None of us has that option. As long as we have body and mind, they just cannot be still. The only time both the body and mind can be completely at rest and not working is when you have a really deep meditation and are in samadhi. That's the time the mind is completely still, the body is completely still. Short of that, there is definitely going to be some activity. And therefore, not working is not an option. The only option that we have is whatever work that I do. Is that work good? Is that work right? Or is it bad? Or is it wrong? Is the work that I do, is it ethical moral or it's unethical and immoral. That's the only choice I have. So the choice is not between working and not working. The choice is between doing what is right or doing what is wrong. One other insight that Krishna offers to Arjuna is, if you look at verses 27 and 28, for instance, in chapter 3, let me read those verses. Prakritehe kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvashah ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate tatvavittu mahabaho gunakarma vibhagayoho guna guneshu vartanta iti matva na sajjate. The gunas of Prakriti perform all action. With the understanding deluded by egoism, a person thinks, I am the doer. But one with true insight into the domains of guna and karma know that gunas as senses merely rest on gunas as objects does not become attached. What it simply means is this: every thing that is material has these three attributes which are called gunas or qualities. Many of you are already familiar with it. They're called sattva, rajas and tamas. One other meaning of guna in Sanskrit means a rope, and the rope is that binds. So all these gunas bind us. And you're familiar with the story that Ramakrishna told about how all these three qualities can bind us. But of these three, sattva is what will show us the way to freedom, the path to freedom. Although, at some point, the sattva will also have to be left behind, because it is also still a material attribute. So what Krishna says is, one other important way we can look upon work is that every work is nothing but a play of gunas. And a very common example I have very fond of giving is this simply. Now, here is this book in my hand, and I can say, I'm reading this book. And this, I'm doing some activity. The action of holding the book and reading it. Now, if I look deeply into what this activity really means, kind of break it up into smaller bits. So what I'm really doing is, well, this hand is holding this book. If I look at this hand, it's essentially just atoms and molecules, just particles of matter in a particular configuration, which is why I don't mistake my hands for my legs, because my legs are also atoms and molecules, but in a different configuration. So I know I'm able to distinguish between one object and another, although they are all particles of matter. It's just by the different forms and different shapes and different way they are configured. So this particles of matter, which I call my hand, are holding these particles of matter, which I call a book. And now I'm reading them. So I'm using my eyes. Again, these eyes are different particles of matter. I identify them as I. And then you can go through the entire process of perception, how the image falls on your retina of your eye, how it goes to the optic nerve, and how ultimately I'm able to read it. Now, throughout this activity, it is just different particles of matter acting and interacting upon one another. But what do I say as a result? I am reading. That is what is meant by when he said in verse number 27. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Yeah. the understanding deluded by egoism, a person feels, I am the doer. So, even for me to say, I am reading, it's not really an accurate thing. It's just particles of matter. Some identified as the hand, the book, the eyes, they are doing all the activity. So, all action, all work belongs to my senses, to my body, to my mind, and to the objects in the world. So I'm not really working at all. So what Krishna is saying is, when I'm doing work, as long as I have the ego that I'm doing the work, let me make sure that the work that I do is right and it is good. That the work that I do is ethical and it is moral. That the work that I do is selfless, as long as my eye is there. Once I realize that I don't do anything at all, then that's what really knowledge means. Knowledge is simply recognizing that I don't do anything, I don't experience anything. The word for doing, the agent of action, the Sanskrit word is karta. And the experiencer of joy and sorrow or whatever else that is happening around us, that experience is called bhokta in Sanskrit. So doer and experiencer. So looking upon myself as a doer, one who does things, and looking upon myself as an experiencer, one who experiences joy and sorrow. As long as I have both these, I must use my judgment and try to do what is right and try to do what is good. If I'm able to do all my actions selflessly, my heart will be purified. And when my heart is purified, what I will find is that I am not the doer, I am not the experiencer. That is when I will know that I am the Atman. So that is how work and knowledge get connected. That in order to acquire the fitness to get knowledge, I need to work selflessly. Right now we read about the Atman. We have knowledge, but that knowledge is called indirect knowledge, paroksha jnana, because that knowledge is simply intellectual, intellectually stimulating. We may understand it thoroughly, and yet that does not guarantee that my ego has gone away. I still have the I sense. I still feel I have got to do things. I still feel I have duties to perform. Now, once I get that higher knowledge, I will have no duty whatsoever. And that's what Krishna says. If you look at verse 17 of the 3rd chapter, it's a very beautiful verse. He says, Yastu atmaratireva syat atmatriptascha manavaha atmanyeva cha santushtaha tasya karyam na vidyate. A person who is devoted to the self, satisfied with the self, and content in the self alone has no duties. So right now, we are satisfied to some extent by many things around us. But when the time comes that we are completely absorbed in the self, well, the word self is a little tricky here. So narcissistic people who cannot just think about themselves, so it's not this little self that is being referred to here. The true self, the Atman. When I no longer depend on anything outside of me, gross or subtle, neither material things, nor appreciation, nor words, nor kindness, nor nothing. That is freedom. A true independence means I don't depend on anything outside of myself. And that's what is being described here. That I'm completely self-content in my true identity as the divine being. Then I don't have any duties. But until that stage is reached, I have duties, I have responsibilities, I must carry them out as best I can. And we saw today two ways, very briefly we saw them, two ways of doing it. Looking upon work as a sacrifice, as a yajna, as merely participating in this movement that is continually occurring within us and outside of us, which completes the circle. Just being a willing participator in this activity. If I become a willing participator in this cosmic sacrifice, much of the tension and stress and anxiety that people experience will go away. People who are unwilling, who have to be kind of, the nature will make us do it. The more reluctant we are, the more we suffer. And a second way, as I said, is guna guneshu vartante, looking upon everything as a play of gunas and just remaining as a witness. So there's a lot that needs to be looked at, but today let's confine our discussion to these two, the idea of yajna and the idea of looking upon everything as a play of gunas. So we will have a 5-minute break now, and then if you have any questions or thoughts or ideas, feel free to share them, and then after the break we will take a look. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhuhu. So let's look at the questions. Thank you for all the questions. I'll try to answer as many as I can. Why is it that the clarity of the heart comes with working selflessly? Is clarity the same as purity of heart? If so, what is this clarity of purity? Why does clarity of the heart come working selflessly? First of all, it does happen. It's known through actual practice. But acting selflessly means trying to get the ego out of the way. It's selfless. This false self that I have, I'm trying to minimize its role in my life. And the more I practice doing that, the false I, the false self gets out of the way. And the more the false self gets out of the way, the real self then manifests itself. That is why it provides that clarity. And clarity of vision and purity of heart, I'm just using two different ways of expressing the same idea. Because sometimes for some people, purity of heart, like doesn't seem to convey the idea as clearly as clarity of vision. So the two are one and the same. And clarity simply means the ability to see things clearly. If I saw things as they are exactly, I would know I am the Atman. I would know that I am birthless and deathless. But right now, I don't feel I am birthless and deathless. I feel that I was born at some point and I'm going to die one day. So I'm not seeing things clearly. So clarity means to see things as they are. We are so engrossed into the materialistic activities. For a parent, how could we accomplish selfless activity without expecting fruition, and how could we yet measure success of our kids? I think the answer is included in the question itself. If I'm aware that I'm engrossed into the materialistic activities, and if I'm convinced that it's not for my good, then I must stop doing so. Now that doesn't mean that I stop doing the work, and as we just saw, that's not an option. But can I look at the work that I do in a different way? So the work may not change, but I change. My way of looking at that work changes. So when you give the example of as a parent, now as a parent, I could say, well, I am taking care of my children because these are my children. And so as long as it's my children and my duty and my responsibility, so long as this kind of I and my remains prominent in my consciousness, then that's when I kind of get sucked into this maelstrom of activities. That is what then makes me both experience joy and sorrow in life, because I'm completely attached to that activity. But if I can do the same work that parents do for their children, looking upon it as a yajna, or looking upon it as guna guneshu vartante, or looking upon it as more ideas will emerge as we study more, as an offering to the divine. So somehow, can I transform my apparently secular duties and responsibilities into a spiritual activity? Can I look upon my work as worship rather than separating out that this is my work and this is my worship, or this is my spiritual engagement and this is my secular engagement with the world? That division, that wall separating the two has to go. And so that's what we can do. And we can still measure the success of our children without necessarily completely getting identified with it through our own false ego. So the more we bring our spiritual outlook on these responsibilities, it will actually improve the quality. Parents will be able to carry out their duties better with a spiritual outlook. Children will be able to carry out their duties towards their parents and towards others in a better way if they see it through a spiritual lens. What are the practical ways one can try to be selfless? Well, I hope that whatever we saw today and in the earlier talks didn't appear to be not so practical, because why would it not be practical to think about, look upon everything as a big sacrifice? Why would it not be practical to keep at the back of the mind that all activities belong to the body and mind, that the self, the real me, is a witness? So I personally think these are quite practical things. Now, how I exactly start putting these into practice in my own individual life, that one has to customize it to their needs, because no two lives are identical. Our life situation is very unique. Every one of us has a very unique situation. So these principles that are offered here in this chapter, we have to say, now, if I want to employ it in my own specific case, how can I employ that principle? That's the difference between, for instance, pure sciences and applied sciences. So what Krishna is offering here are principles. And our job is to try to apply that principle in our own specific, special case. Since Vedic sages personified the forces of nature, do we attribute a deeper reality to their perceptions? Of course, the reality is always in layers. And to the extent we are able to go deeper and deeper, the deeper layers of reality will be revealed to us. So in a most superficial sort of way, as I said, in some ways, the basic science that we learnt as school children. That's the most superficial sort of understanding of the world. But then even when you go to quantum mechanics, a little bit higher sciences, then you see a deeper reality, that this is not just solid, but if I have a powerful microscope, I might see that even this is porous, that there are all these atoms and molecules. It's not as solid as it appears. And then further layer would be, if I bring the insights that we find in Vedanta, then it goes even deeper than where quantum mechanics takes us. So yes, there are these different layers of reality, and it all depends on how deep we can go, how deep we want to go. Science is always making efforts to understand or describe what is consciousness. Will science Yes. Will science be ever able to do this truly from a Vedantic standpoint as the rishis were able to do? I hope so. But I think as long as material sciences are not willing to let go of some of their assumptions, it might be difficult to do so. It seems to me, and I can be corrected, I'm not an expert in science, but it seems to me that most of what science tends to do is deal with that which is quantifiable or measurable. I think science does a great job of trying to understand the objective universe and measure them and see them and so on. But the subjective element, I don't think there is some acknowledgement of the role of the observer in what is observed objectively, but there are no ways to measure the subject. I mean, even when science at present tries to acknowledge the role of the subject, what they still end up doing is in making an objective measurement. By that I mean, what I am conscious of really cannot be measured by any instrument. And what oftentimes is done is like, you can put stuff, electrodes or whatever it is, and measure my brain activity. So that's up to that point I think science does. But then to equate that whatever brain activity is seen that is my consciousness, that's too big a leap for me to equate the two as one and the same. So an objective observation and a subjective experience, that's, I think, a basic hurdle. And therefore, science will have to make some big changes in its assumptions if its understanding is to completely align with what the Vedic rishis said. Just as microscope or telescope help us see the worlds not visible to our sense organs, does meditation help in seeing the world not evident to the mind? Oh yes, it does. Swami Vivekananda's talks on Raja Yoga, he makes this very clear, how even it's very scientific in some ways of how meditation can reveal to us realities which are much more subtle. There is some effort being made. There is this, I think it's called the Mind Body Institute, And the Dalai Lama has been encouraging that study for many years, or what the effect of meditation is on people, and they have tried to see again the brain activity and so on. It has some utility. I'm not quite sure whether that itself will bring the two ways of looking at the world completely. They will begin to see the world in the same. I'm not very sure about that. Performing work effectively and improving at the work we do requires that we pay attention to the results of our work. How can we observe the results of our work and strive to become better and more effective at it without being attached to the results? Clearly, there is a saying in Sanskrit, prayojanam anuddishya na mandopi pravartate, which means that without a specific motive, nobody does any work. So clearly, when we undertake an activity, we expect a certain result. So when we start a work, we know that this is the work that I'm doing and this is the result I'm anticipating. Once the course of action is determined, I need to put my entire attention on the work, because if I do that work well, then the result which is supposed to give will automatically come to me. And so while I'm doing the work, if the part of my mind is anxious or worried about the result, then I'm not really giving my full mind to the work itself. So the work quality will suffer. And if I'm not giving my full mind to the work, then chances are the result may not be what I want it to be. Sometimes we discover that if I'd only worked a little bit harder, if I'd concentrated a little bit more, things would have worked. But I was not able to do it because a part of my mind was thinking about the results. So, yes, we have a certain result in mind, but once we determine the course of action, we must give our full mind to the activity itself. That's the idea. And attachment to the results can also mean, clearly, none of us undertakes any activity in order to fail. We want success. But it's possible that sometimes we do everything correctly, everything rightly, and yet the thing doesn't work, yet it fails. Now, if I'm too much attached to success, I'm going to be devastated. I'm just going to feel like, oh, it's just waste, and just going to beat yourself for failing. So it's good to recognize that it's possible that I do everything perfectly and yet the thing doesn't work. And that is because there is always some unanticipated factor. There's something beyond my control. So generally one would expect if you do everything perfectly, the results will come. And usually they do, but sometimes they don't. So what we need to recognize is, if I enjoy the work itself and give my whole mind to it, then, and if it succeeds, that's great. I'm going to be happy. But even if it doesn't succeed, I'm going to be a little sad, of course. But the doing that work with full attention itself has given me some joy. So it's not a total loss. But if my entire attachment is to the success, then even the joy of doing the work will be lost. So that's how we can prevent ourselves from being attached to the results. Focus on the work, do it as best you can, and then be ready and be mentally prepared. If it doesn't work, even then you have learned something. You can then analyze why something failed, and then you try again. Nothing in this world, absolutely nothing in this world, there's nobody in this world who can say everything that I've done has been completely successful. It's never been like that, never throughout history. And so if we fail at something, we don't have to feel bad about it, because even greater people than us have failed in the past. So failure itself is not a problem, but giving up after failure, that's a problem. So if I don't give up, if I learn from every failure and I keep on trying, keep on improving, it is to such people that success eventually comes. When the Lord prescribes the two paths of Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga, if Karma Yoga leads to the purification of heart and to Jnana, what is the purpose of Jnana Yoga path? Well, you need Jnana. If the problem is ignorance, then the solution to ignorance is knowledge. If the problem is darkness, then the way to remove the darkness is light. There is no other way. You cannot remove darkness in any other way other than bringing in light. So if your analysis of the human situation is that the problem is ignorance, then the knowledge is the only way. Knowledge alone can remove ignorance. Nothing else can remove ignorance. But what if I'm not fit for that knowledge? That I'm not able to employ that knowledge, then there is certain handicap in the middle. There is certain difficulty. There is a certain obstacle. And that obstacle, Karma Yoga removes. But after Karma Yoga removes that obstacle, it is knowledge that removes ignorance. Can you explain what Nirashi means? Nirashir nirmamo bhutva. There is a passage that comes in the Gita. It means living without expectations. There is that saying, Ashahi paramam dukkham, nairashyam paramam sukham. It comes in the Bhagavata. That living with expectations is the most profound misery. Living without expectation is the most profound joy. If we want to be happy in life, there is a way to be happy even before you have become enlightened. And that is, try to live without expectation. Now that's a tall order. But sometimes it is helpful. Make a list if you want of what are the things you are expecting in life, and from how many people do you have expectations. And after you have made that list, go over that list once again and ask yourself, is it really worth it? Should I really have that expectation? And if you can strike off many in that list, the extent of happiness we can experience in life depends on how big or small that list is. So fewer the expectations we have in life about things or from people, the happier we are. The longer our list is, the more chances there are of me feeling disappointed, or me feeling betrayed, or me feeling left off. And ideally, if someone can say, I don't expect anything from anyone, that person is the happiest person. It's not just about saying it, it's like deep down feeling it within. And the beauty is this, we make the mistake of thinking that expectations change the outcome. They don't. Expectation is if there is any completely useless activity in the world, that is expectation. Because expectation doesn't change anything at all. It's like me saying, I hope that there is a vaccine for COVID-19 in a month. And I strongly expect it. Maybe 100 other people or 1,000,000 other people expect it. But that vaccine, it's going to come when it is going to come. Just because I'm expecting it, it doesn't mean it's going to come sooner. Or just because I say, oh, it's going to come only next year, doesn't mean that it cannot come in 6 months. So my expectations about when the next vaccine will come doesn't change the reality of whenever it is going to come. So why should I needlessly set up this expectation and set myself up for a possible disappointment or anger or frustration? And that's the idea. So nirashir means living without expectation. I do japa for a very little duration, have inclination to do more. Holy Mother Sharda Devi used to say that japat siddhihi, that spiritual perfection can be attained through japa. So the more you do it, and you do it with faith, with devotion, with regularity, it will certainly yield very good results. Failure in some work, could it be because of effects of past karma? No, failure is not the effect of past karma. If I experience pain and suffering, that could be a result of past karma. So a result is always sukha or dukkha. The result is not about success or failure. The result is about sukha and dukkha. So thank you very, very much for all the questions and all the comments. And we will continue to study next week. There are still some ideas about karma we can touch upon, especially the idea of swadharma that Krishna discusses here in verse 35. And I think that will need a bit of reflection. We shall do that next week, and other connected ideas as well. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto us.